President Trump offers federal help to stop the violence. Will they take it, Todd?
That's the question, Steve, Ainsley, and Brian. Good morning to all three of you. A weekend of celebration turning into a weekend of mourning for so many. Let's start in Chicago, where at least 77 people were shot, 14 of them killed, including a 14-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl shot, 9 killed. Atlanta, let's go there. An 8-year-old shot and killed after cops say the girl's mother tried to drive through illegally placed barricades near where protesters burned down a Wendy's in response to the killing of Rayshard Brooks.
She never make on my birthday. We ain't doing nothing.
They say Black Lives Matter. You killed your home.
All part of a violent weekend in our nation's cities, including Baltimore, Philadelphia, Cleveland, among others. In response, the president tweeting in part, federal government ready, willing, and able to help, if asked. The president later tweeting that Democrats want to defund and abolish police. It all goes back to Brian's question. Will they take that help? Steve, Ainsley, and Brian, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes, it was definitely a politically charged 4th of July. COVID cases are rising as well. But all these shootings around our country, when we're supposed to celebrate on the 4th of July, shootings in Chicago, Atlanta, Baltimore, Detroit, Greenville, South Carolina, Memphis, Philadelphia, St. Louis, Cleveland, just to name some of them. There was so much violence. We have Mark Meadows. It's his first interview as the White House Chief of Staff. He's going to be on in our last hour during the 8 a.m. hour. And then we have Chad Wolf, the acting DHS secretary. He's going to be live in the next hour, 7 a.m. hour. Look, guys, I mean, you hear these stories. That Atlanta story really is gripping. An 8-year-old was in the car with her mom and her mom's friend. They're driving across the street from that Wendy's where Rayshard Brooks was killed. There are protests still going on there at that Wendy's. This mom tried to do a U-turn so that her daughter could go home to see her cousins, and her daughter is now dead. The mom and dad were speaking out over the weekend, and it's just gut-wrenching.
It is indeed. And, you know, ever since Rayshard Brooks was killed at that Wendy's in the police-involved shooting, they have had these protests down there, and there have been people with long guns, and they have occasionally set up these barricades. The mayor of...
You can't blame this on the police officer. You can't say that this is about criminal justice reform. This is about some people carrying some weapons who shot up a car with an 8-year-old baby in the car. We've had over 75 shootings in this city over the past several weeks. You can't blame that on APD. We are doing each other more harm than any police officer on this force. So if you are a part of a protest or a demonstration that looks like it's going the wrong way, that's your time to pull back, because you are no longer a part of the solution. You are a part of the problem.
And in particular, the mayor ordered those people around that Wendy's with guns to get out and just to stop it. Police are still trying to figure out who fired the shots into the vehicle that killed the little girl. Here in New York City, which, let's see, last night, 7 shot, 5 fatally in 3 hours. And the New York City cops blame Mayor de Blasio because he cut $1 billion from the fund. 2 New York City police officers in the Bronx were in a car when somebody fired a bullet. Thankfully, neither one of them seriously hurt. But the New York City Police Benevolent Association said criminals with guns fear no consequences. And the mayor owes his constituents, Brian, an explanation.
No, he was too busy painting Black Lives Matters in the middle of the street across from Trump Tower. He's an embarrassment to the country. He should just walk away now and save the city, what's left of it. In Chicago, 67 are shot. The police have 13 people were killed in separate shootings, and including a 7-year-old girl there in the city of Austin, and a 14-year-old boy, according to the Chicago Sun-Times. To me, I love this mayor's comment in Atlanta. It shows a balance to her approach. You know, obviously, she said some nice things about police, but she said there's got to be some transformation. And there was some quick movement in terms of a verdict on the cop from 2 weeks ago at that Wendy's. Yeah. But I love the balance. I love to see a Black Lives Matter person come out, spokesperson, say we're just as offended what happened in Chicago. We're just as offended what happened in Atlanta. We're just as offended what happened in New York on black crime as we are on what's going on between police police and what they say is police and African Americans in America today. So I love that she did. I think she's upping that mayor is upping her stock in the vice presidential, I guess, sweepstakes.
The Veep
because she's actually not talking about what I would do. You could watch what she's doing. So I'd appreciate her remarks, and I would hope people will start sobering up to what's going on, because we are watching these major cities, big and small, spiral into chaos.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to add one thing on what Brian just said, how the cities are spiraling into chaos. If you live in one of those cities, what are you doing? Here in New York City, since mid-March, 500,000 people have left, related to the COVID and related to the violence and the looting, and the numbers are just going up. So think about it. If you're living in one of those places where essentially the police don't really respond because a lot of them are worried about their futures, how safe are you? I saw somebody say that New York has become a place where the soup kitchens are full and the skyscrapers are empty. You walk around this neighborhood right here, there are so many businesses that have plywood over their windows because they are worried that the looters are going to come back, Ainsley.
I know.
Or they were there already.
I mean, Brian and Steve, you've lived here for several decades. Brian, your whole life, or in the New York area, out on Long Island. But you've worked in New York. You know, so y'all have seen the transformation. If you look at the numbers, June shootings in New York City, 205 in June, just last month. Bloodiest June in 24 years. We're going back, guys. 236 shootings in June of 1996. When we remember, if you came to New York, you cover your pocketbook, you don't put your wallet in the back of your jeans. And now we're back to that again. And it's very scary and it's sad for this city.
Back to wearing a money belt.
Yeah, right. So Kanye West says he's running for president 2020. He's not going to be able to get on the ballot in some of these states that have already decided, some big states like Florida and Texas. Where is the direction of this election going? Joe Biden yesterday was tweeting, and we're wondering, is Kanye going to take some of his votes from the African-American community or from others? Joe Biden tweeted this. He said, "We're going to beat Donald Trump. And when we do, we won't just rebuild this nation, we'll transform it." Didn't go into an explanation of what exactly that looks like. Katrina Pearson from the Trump 2020 campaign, she is the senior advisor. She said this about his comments.
In office for 44 plus years and still complaining about things that are wrong, perhaps it's time to look in the mirror, because in my book, if you're a patriot, that 44 years would have been spent doing things for the American public and for your country. And I just don't see the tangible results that have come from Joe Biden of a patriot. I'm not quite sure that he's aware of much these days, but one thing I do know, Steve, is that Joe Biden has been the author and the administrator of a lot of policies that have been destructive to our country and to our citizens.
So she was just talking in general to Steve Hilton yesterday, but the critics of Biden are saying that he did serve, like she said, for 40 years, didn't solve any major issues of the past, and they're worried that he's going to take marching orders from the AOCs of the party. Steve?
I have heard that criticism. Meanwhile, Susan Rice was on Meet the Press yesterday, and, she is being considered, apparently, as well, apparently on Joe Biden's short list to be vice president. And she was asked by Andrea Mitchell, hey, now, you've been in the bureaucracy for a long time, but you've never actually run for an office or held an elected office. She wanted to know about her being qualified then to be the vice president, given the fact that many of her Republican critics have said that she has a problem telling the truth. We saw that during Benghazi and whatnot. Anyway, here she is, Susan Rice, talking about how she would be qualified to be the next vice president of the United States.
Joe Biden needs to make the decision as to who he thinks will be his best running mate. And I will do my utmost, drawing on my experience of years in government, years of making the bureaucracy work. I've worked on multiple campaigns, presidential campaigns. I've been on the campaign trail as a surrogate, and I'm going to do everything I can to help get Joe Biden elected and to help him succeed as president, whether I'm his running mate or I'm a door knocker. I don't mind. I just want to get Joe Biden elected and see the Democrats control the Senate and retain the House.
So she's been involved in making the bureaucracy work for a very long time. She's worked on multiple campaigns. She's been a surrogate. She says, Brian, she's absolutely qualified to be the next vice president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, she's got a great resume. She certainly's got the intellect and the experience, but I think she would be a gift to Republicans because she has caught herself in a lot of tornadoes during the 8 years in which President Obama was in office, from Benghazi on back. In terms of being candid, there's an issue there, and I think Republicans will keep their powder dry, hoping that Vice President Biden names her as his running mate. I would just bring something else. Contrast Transform America with Joe Biden as opposed to President Trump at Mount Rushmore talking about how great America is and not whitewashing and not bringing up other people that fought for equality. I just thought the president's speech on Friday that was panned by everyone that wants Joe Biden to transform the country shows, I guess, the divide in their country. And I look for Mark Meadows beginning today and the president starting really on Friday to start saying, hey, look, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, they're all part of the American story. Don't throw it in the river. Don't throw it in the lake. Don't rip it down in the middle of the night. Be proud of it and show and underline the progress we've made as a country and look around the rest of the world and ask yourself why everyone still wants to be here. And when these guys or whoever it was took down Frederick Douglass's statue in Rochester, you really have no clue what you're protesting. Frederick Douglass is everything that you want this country to become. You don't destroy what he was and the symbol of his greatness where he lived in Rochester, New York. Ainsley, it made absolutely no sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you, Brian, and they just don't want to say that they're supporting President Trump.
Frederick Douglass?
I know. If you look at the poll numbers, the president's not doing as well as Biden is. But we saw poll numbers. There were, dozens of polls. How many polls? Hundreds of polls, dozens of polls. I heard the number over the weekend, can't remember, but a lot of polls, and the president didn't do well, wasn't winning in most of those in 2016. So there are a lot of people that feel the same way you do, Brian. They're just scared to talk about it because they're worried they'll be called racist, even though they don't agree with slavery. But they do agree with having those statues up. Tammy Duckworth was also interviewed over the weekend, and she's one of the people on the vice president's short list, on Biden's short list. And she was asked whether or not the vice president should select an African-American woman to join him on the ticket. And she kind of sidestepped that. She said that basically, I support whatever he wants to do. So we'll see. He's going to, we're only a few weeks away from that now. We're in July. He says he's going to announce the beginning of August probably, or at sometime in August. So we'll see.
We will.
All right, let's hand it over to Carly. She has some headlines for us. She's upstairs. Hey, Carly.
Hey, good morning. We're going to start here with a Fox News alert. 8 people are feared dead after 2 planes collided over a lake in Idaho. The bodies of 2 passengers were recovered before the plane sank. 6 others are unaccounted for. Witnesses say they saw an explosion and debris fall from the sky. Crews will try to recover the wreckage later today or tomorrow. The NTSB is investigating. COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. nearing 130,000 this morning. There are nearly 2.9 million total cases. California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida all posting record numbers of new infections over the holiday weekend. In the Lone Star State, hospitalizations just hit a record high. 2 counties reporting their hospitals are at full capacity. Florida adding nearly 10,000 new cases on Sunday, with total cases topping 200,000. President Trump heading to New Hampshire this weekend for his next rally. His campaign announcing the outdoor event in Portsmouth on Saturday. The campaign will provide face masks and strongly encourage people to wear them. This is the president's second rally since the coronavirus pandemic began. His first rally was, of course, last month inside an arena in Tulsa. And those are your headlines, guys.
Makes sense outside. All right, Carly, thank you very much.
To see my daughter on the table with a gunshot wound to the forehead, it hurts me. That my youngest daughter is no longer here, that is 7 years old. That I would not be able to talk to her, hold her, tell her anything, her bedtime stories, anything.
That is the father of 7-year-old Natalia Wallace, known as Natalie, who was shot and killed while playing in her grandma's yard. Her family described her as sweet, shy, loving, and good at math. She is just one of the 14 people killed in Chicago over the Independence Day weekend, which also saw at least 77 shootings. Here to discuss, Pastor Corey Brooks, the founder and senior pastor of New Beginnings Church of Chicago. Pastor, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we had John on Wednesday to talk about the numbers, and it just got worse. Can you explain to us, for the people looking in to what is happening in Chicago, what is going on? How do you explain this gigantic number of shootings?
Well, you have a bunch of individuals, young men, who are illegal gun owners. Not only are they illegal gun owners, you know, people are afraid to leave the house. But I'll tell you, in 2012, the Chicago Sun-Times reported that the block that we live on was the most dangerous block in Chicago. But I'm happy to say that this weekend we had no shootings, and that's because of work like our non-for-profit organization, Project Hood, that is going out and doing the work that needs to be done to make sure that we stop the violence. But individuals are very scared to walk the streets, scared to go to the store, scared to go to the playgrounds, and it's a very unfortunate thing.
Yeah, no kidding. The president has offered to send in the feds to New York or Chicago if they need help with the violence. Do you think the mayor of Chicago should take the president up on that offer?
Well, I'm for whatever it takes to stop the violence, whatever it takes to save a life. I think sometimes we have to get beyond our pride of feeling inadequate and just come to an understanding that whatever it takes to save the lives of individuals in our city, that's exactly what needs to be done. So if bringing in the feds, bringing in the military or whoever to help us to make sure that we can get rid of this violence, I'm all for it, whatever it takes.
Pastor, has the mayor of Chicago dropped the ball, and has the Chicago Police Department helped, or is it just so overwhelming they just can't get a handle on it?
I think this problem has been going on for many years, even before our present mayor. It's an issue that we've been dealing with for years. It's an issue that we're going to continue to deal with if we don't get our hands on it. I think it's overwhelming for the police department. I think it's overwhelming for the mayor. And that's the reason why it's so important that we have organizations on the ground, grassroots organizations who know these individuals, who live in the community, who are able to go out and talk to them, just like I did this weekend. I didn't wait on the mayor, and I don't wait on the police to solve our issues. I was out there talking to guys on the block and making sure that our community stays safe. And I think that's what it's going to take. People in the community are going to have to take responsibility and not leave it up to someone else.
Well, it doesn't seem like anybody's taking responsibility right now. I know that you have been doing that for a number of years. Let's talk a little bit about your business. You know, you were talking to people over the weekend. I would imagine that morale in Chicago is at almost an historic low when you look at the number of people who have been laid off from the coronavirus and everything else that's going on in the American dynamic right now. Is morale down there like you've never seen before?
You know, it is, Steve. It's very hard on a lot of people, and I think it's kind of hard for people outside of Chicago to understand, especially people who live outside of the inner area of the South Side. People are demoralized. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people are economically frustrated. The crime, the murders, and things of that sort, it's causing people to feel disgruntled, and unfortunately, people are going to leave, and people are going to move out of the city because they just can't take the risk of allowing their children to be shot and killed. It's just too much to deal with.
It is indeed. All right, Pastor Corey Brooks. Sir, thank you very much for joining us on this Monday morning.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. All right, 6:25 here in New York. Protesters tearing down a Christopher Columbus statue and tossing it into a harbor in Baltimore. Our next guest has a history lesson for those protesters and the country you're going to want to hear coming up next.
Landing near U.S. troops in Iraq overnight. It hit just outside of Baghdad International. Thankfully, no one was hurt. U.S. officials blamed Iran-backed militants for that attack, which was the 7th against the airport in less than a month. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard says it has built secret missile cities along the Persian Gulf. A Navy general said the underground sites contained surface-to-air missiles and called them a nightmare for Tehran's enemies. Iran has used the term missile city before to describe storage sites. Brian?
All right, thanks, Ainsley. Violent protests erupting over the weekend, including one in Baltimore. Rioters toppled a Christopher Columbus statue before tossing it into a city harbor. And they're examining whether to take down Columbus from Columbus Circle in Manhattan. Here to react is historian Lawrence Bergreen. He's author of Columbus, The Four Voyages, an incredible book that gives you confidence on Columbus in a way I never thought possible. Lawrence, first off, how do you feel when you see Columbus's statue go into the ocean?
Well, it actually is astounding to me that he arouses. So he was a mixture of things that are good and bad. It's kind of hard to separate one from the other.
But he did transform the world.
He transformed the world. If not for Columbus, this world would be very different. And he also didn't actually intend to inflict this cruelty. You would think he set out with a goal to commit genocide or kill as many people as possible. But that actually wasn't his goal. He thought he was on a trade mission with China, which he didn't know where it was. And he spent 4 voyages trying to find it and never did. So he was in some ways hopelessly misguided, despite the fact that he was an excellent navigator, but his sense of geography was really skewed.
Lawrence, yeah, it's hard to understand how you would act if you saw another civilization. I mean, he came across a whole nother civilization, and we want him to act like he was born in the year 2020.
Yes, we have to. His time was a very different time. For example, there was a lot of slavery in Italy, where he came from. There was even some slavery in the New World, or servitude. So slavery was not uncommon. It was part of the world at that time, and he was, you know, living in his time. And he was trying to understand a world that made no sense to him because his maps made no sense. And he was also, as the voyages wore on, and there were 4 of them, beginning to lose his mind. During a storm, he thought he heard the voice of God speaking to him. He was a very devout person, and he gradually lost his bearings in more ways than one. So he is a tragic, I say almost Shakespearean figure, because he had great gifts and great faults.
Right.
We find it hard to reconcile.
True. He brought the wheel. He brought Christianity. He brought back. He married 2 worlds at the time in which most of the world thought it was flat. I heard it described that what Columbus did with his 3 ships was like, well, we went to the moon, only more dangerous. Final thought?
It was a lot more dangerous. What was incredible was he lost almost no lives on these 4 voyages, which is an incredible feat, given the fact that nobody had successfully crossed the Atlantic before him. So you have to give him credit for that part. And the other part, you have to realize he was a person of his time. The other explorers who followed afterward were all of the same ilk and had about the same attitude. He was not a throwback or anything like that. And he had also a sense of mission. He believed that God was inspiring him to do this. And when he was converting people whom he discovered in the New World, when he wasn't enslaving them, he felt he was acting on God's wishes and mandates. So, as I said, he's a really complicated, fascinating figure.
Which is why it was a great subject of a book, and you were able to capture all that in Columbus, The Four Voyages. As we look at Columbus is front and center in the news today, who lived 500 years ago. Lawrence, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. Meanwhile, straight ahead, there are more than a dozen names on the short list to be Joe Biden's running mate. But who are the top contenders? Lawrence Jones shares his list with us next.